It is the most searched artifact in human history. More books have been written about it than almost any other object on Earth. Governments have funded expeditions to find it. Entire careers have been devoted to its pursuit. And yet, 3,000 years after it disappeared, no one knows where it is. The Ark of the Covenant, a golden box carried through the desert by the people of Israel, said to contain the very presence of God, said to have parted rivers, toppled city walls, and struck men dead for touching it. And then, sometime around 586 BC, when the Babylonians burned Solomon's temple to the ground, it vanished. What really happened to the Ark of the Covenant? The answer is far stranger and far more contested than most people realize. To understand what happened to the Ark, you first have to understand what it was. According to the book of Exodus, God gave Moses precise specifications for its construction on Mount Sinai. It was to be a chest made of acacia wood, 2.5 cubits long, 1.5 cubits wide, and 1.5 cubits tall, roughly 4 feet by 2.5 feet. It was to be overlaid inside and out with pure gold. Along the top would be a golden cover called the mercy seat, flanked by 2 golden cherubim facing each other, their wings spread upward and inward. Inside went 3 sacred items: the stone tablets of the 10 Commandments, a golden jar of manna from the desert, and Aaron's rod that had budded. The Ark was Israel's most sacred object, the physical dwelling place of God's presence on earth. The stories surrounding the Ark in the Hebrew Bible describe something that behaved unlike any ordinary object. When the Ark approached the Jordan River, the waters stopped flowing and the Israelites crossed on dry ground. At Jericho, the Ark was carried in the procession that preceded the walls falling. When the Philistines captured it during a battle near Ebenezer, a catastrophe broke out wherever the Ark was taken. First, the Philistines of Ashdod broke out in tumors, and their idol fell and shattered. Then it was moved to Gath. More tumors, more panic. Then to Ekron. Then the Philistines, terrified, returned it to Israel on a cart pulled by 2 milk cows who walked straight back to Israelite territory without being guided, which the Philistines interpreted as a sign from God. The Ark was not a passive religious symbol. In the biblical account, it was dangerous to handle, dangerous to approach without authorization, and capable of acting on its own. When David became king of Israel, one of his first priorities was bringing the Ark to Jerusalem, his newly captured capital. The first attempt went wrong, almost immediately. The Ark was being transported on a cart when the oxen stumbled. A man named Uzzah reached out to steady the Ark so it would not fall. He touched it and died instantly. The text says God's anger burned against Uzzah for what it calls an act of irreverence. David was terrified. He left the Ark at the house of a man named Obed-Edom for 3 months. When the household of Obed-Edom began to prosper visibly, David was convinced the Ark was safe to move again. The second attempt succeeded, this time carried properly by the Levites on poles, with David dancing before it in celebration. The Ark entered Jerusalem to the sound of trumpets and shouting. David wanted to build a permanent home for the Ark, a temple worthy of God's presence. But he was told he would not be the one to build it. That task fell to his son, Solomon. Solomon's temple took 7 years to build. The exterior walls were made of stone. The interior was lined entirely with cedar wood and overlaid with pure gold. At the center of the temple was the Holy of Holies, a perfect cube, 30 feet on each side, accessible only to the high priest, only once a year, on the Day of Atonement. When the Ark was carried into the Holy of Holies for the first time, the Bible records that a cloud filled the temple so thick that the priests could not perform their duties. Solomon prayed at the dedication, "The Lord has said that he would dwell in thick darkness. I have indeed built you an exalted house, a place for you to dwell forever." For the next 4 centuries, the Ark remained in Solomon's temple, and then it disappeared. In 586 BC, the Babylonian king Nebuchadnezzar besieged Jerusalem for the second time. The city fell. The temple was systematically looted and then burned to the ground. The Book of Kings gives a detailed inventory of what the Babylonians took: the bronze pillars of the temple, the bronze sea, the stands, the pots, the shovels, the snuffers, the bowls, the ladles, the fire pans, the basins. An extraordinary list of sacred items, golden and silver vessels by the hundreds. Notice what is not in that list: the Ark of the Covenant. The most sacred object in the entire temple is never mentioned, not carried off, not burned, not destroyed, not hidden. The text simply stops mentioning it. After 586 BC, the Ark never appears again in the historical record. It is mentioned in lists of items missing from the Second Temple. The prophet Jeremiah speaks of a future time when people will no longer miss it or think about it. And then, silence. So what happened? Over 3,000 years, 4 major theories have emerged, each with serious scholars behind it. The first theory is the simplest. The Ark was destroyed when the Babylonians burned the temple. Under this view, its absence from the list of looted items simply means it was consumed in the fire, or that it was destroyed in a way the biblical authors chose not to record. The Babylonians were thorough. They burned everything they did not take. Supporters of this view point out that the Second Temple, built by the returning exiles 70 years later, never had an ark. The Holy of Holies of the Second Temple was completely empty. When the Roman general Pompey famously forced his way into the Holy of Holies in 63 BC, he found nothing inside. If the ark had survived somewhere, the returning exiles would have known where it was and brought it back. The empty Holy of Holies, they argue, is the strongest evidence that the ark simply no longer existed. The second theory argues that the ark was never in the temple when the Babylonians arrived, because faithful priests had hidden it in advance. This theory draws on a fascinating passage in the Second Maccabees, a text not included in all biblical canons, but accepted by Catholic and Orthodox Christians. In it, the prophet Jeremiah takes the ark, the tabernacle, and the altar of incense to a cave on Mount Nebo, the mountain where Moses died, and seals them inside. He tells the people that the location will remain unknown until God gathers his people again. There is also a document called the Copper Scroll, found among the Dead Sea Scrolls, which lists 64 locations where temple treasures are supposedly hidden. Several scholars believe it describes real hiding places used before the Babylonian conquest. The ark is not explicitly named, but some entries describe objects matching its description. Under this theory, the ark is still buried somewhere, sealed in a cave or underground chamber, waiting. The third theory takes us to Africa. In the ancient city of Axum in northern Ethiopia stands the Church of Our Lady, Mary of Zion. Inside a small chapel adjacent to the main church, guarded by a single monk who is never allowed to leave, the Ethiopian Orthodox Church claims to possess the original Ark of the Covenant. They have claimed this for over 1,000 years. No outside observer has ever been allowed to see it. The guardian monk, a position held for life, is the only human being permitted to look upon it. The Ethiopian tradition holds that the ark was brought to Ethiopia by Menelik, the son of King Solomon and the Queen of Sheba, who secretly replaced the real ark with a replica when he returned to Ethiopia. Some versions place this event during Solomon's reign. Others say it was brought by priests fleeing before the Babylonian invasion, via a Jewish community that settled on Elephantine Island in Egypt. Graham Hancock popularized this theory in his 1992 book, The Sign and the Seal. Ethiopian Christians regard it not as a theory, but as history. The fourth major theory places the Ark exactly where you might expect, beneath the Temple Mount in Jerusalem, in a hidden chamber that has never been excavated. In the late 19th century, the British explorer Charles Warren conducted underground surveys of Jerusalem and discovered an extensive network of ancient tunnels and chambers beneath the Temple Mount. Some of these have never been fully explored. Archaeologist Leon Rittmeyer has proposed a specific location within the bedrock of the Temple Mount, where he believes the Ark may rest. A rectangular depression in the rock that, he argues, matches the exact dimensions of the Ark. The problem is access. The Temple Mount is one of the most politically sensitive pieces of real estate on Earth. The Waqf, the Islamic authority that controls access to the site, prohibits any archaeological excavation. The Israeli government, since capturing the site in 1967, has maintained the same policy to preserve the status quo. Whatever lies beneath the Temple Mount has not been scientifically investigated since the 19th century. Here is what archaeology can and cannot tell us. No physical evidence of the Ark has ever been found. Not a fragment. Not an inscription confirming its destruction. Not a record of it being taken to Babylon. The Babylonian chronicles, which are detailed and reliable historical documents, list many items taken from Jerusalem. The Ark is not among them. Excavations in Jerusalem have confirmed the Babylonian destruction. Layers of ash and burned material dating to 586 BC have been found throughout the city of David. The destruction was real and catastrophic, but the fate of the Ark specifically remains archaeologically invisible. What we do have is significant absence. The Second Temple accounts, the later rabbinic literature, the Roman descriptions of the temple, all agree that the Holy of Holies of the Second Temple contained nothing. Whatever the Ark was, wherever it went, it never returned to Jerusalem after 586 BC. That much, at least, is not in dispute. Before we answer what happened to the Ark, it is worth asking why it matters so much. For Jews, the Ark represented God's covenant with Israel, the physical container of the law given at Sinai, the focal point of the entire sacrificial system, the one place on earth where God's presence dwelt in a tangible way. Its loss was not merely a military defeat. It was a theological crisis that shaped Judaism for centuries. For Christians, the Ark carries typological significance, seen as a foreshadowing of Mary, who bore the Word of God in human form, just as the Ark bore the written Word of God in gold. For the entire world, the Ark represents a question that cannot be easily dismissed. Is there an object somewhere on earth that carries the physical imprint of a divine encounter? And if so, where is it? That question has driven explorers, scholars, treasure hunters, and believers for 3,000 years. It has not been answered. Here is what the biblical record does say. When the Persian king Cyrus defeated Babylon in 539 BC and permitted the Jewish exiles to return to Jerusalem, they came back with a detailed list of sacred objects that Nebuchadnezzar had taken. The Book of Ezra records that Cyrus himself brought out gold and silver vessels from the temple, 5,400 items in total. The list is exhaustive. The Ark is not on it. The returning exiles built the Second Temple, completed around 516 BC. When the older priests who remembered Solomon's temple saw the new foundation, they wept, not just with joy, but with grief. The new temple was smaller, more modest. The Ark was gone. The prophet Jeremiah, writing before the Babylonian conquest, had said something striking. In those days they shall no more say, the Ark of the covenant of the Lord. It shall not come to mind, or be remembered, or missed. It shall not be made again. Some read this as prophecy. Others read it as the clearest biblical statement that the Ark's era had simply ended. So what really happened to the Ark of the Covenant? The honest answer is, we do not know. And anyone who tells you they know with certainty is not being straight with you. The destruction theory is the most archaeologically conservative and the most unsatisfying. The hidden in advance theory requires believing that priests successfully concealed the most sacred object in Israel from both the Babylonians and 3,000 years of subsequent searching. The Ethiopia theory is centuries old and held with absolute conviction by millions of devout Christians, and entirely unverifiable. The Temple Mount theory is geographically plausible and physically untestable. What we know for certain is this: An object described with extraordinary specificity in the ancient texts once existed and was venerated at the center of Israelite worship for 4 centuries.